This week at the lab, we've been going over body lock passing. The first class of the week did not go well. With that said, we did the exact same material, exact same content, exact same game on Wednesday, and it was easily one of the best classes I've ever taught. The aim of this video is to obviously go over the body lock stuff that we went over at the lab this week, but I also want to go over the secret lesson that appeared serendipitously. Is that a word? I'm going with it. On why Monday was so disastrous, but Wednesday was very successful, even though we essentially did the exact same thing. Past two videos have kind of really went into all of the information on everything that we did. I'm going to try and streamline a lot of the technical concepts today so that we can get to the core of the actual lesson that I think people really took away on Wednesday compared to Monday. Like I said, this week we looked at the body lock and how to utilize it effectively. So the game that we used to play with the body lock was really, really simple. The position we're starting in is a body lock pass with the bottom player in a supine guard and the top player with a body lock around their opponent's hips and a connection to, like, their legs have to be in like a butterfly guard type entanglement. The offensive player has to pass for their win, but the constraint is they have to use the body lock. That's a skill we're developing, have to use the body lock. The defensive player's goal is to sweep the top player. They can use any sweep that they want. They can even sweep or reverse the passer as they're just about to pass, or even if they've just passed. If they're able to sweep or reverse the position before they're able to stabilize and settle into that pass, that's still a win for them. However, the constraint for the defensive player is they can't be just trying to retain their guard. Or if they are passed, I don't want to see any effort in trying to get their guard back. I want to see the defensive player continually working to sweep the top player, continually looking to try and become the offensive player, not just remain in a defensive posture. So the defensive player win is obviously really simple. You have to sweep and reverse the position. Offensive players win, real simple. You have to pass. My assumption was with the game's simplicity, we would fly through the content that I had prepared for the guys on Monday. However, we spent 3 hours going over the same basic concept over and over and over again, and no one was really getting it. The core issue that they weren't really getting was how much I was stressing the importance of staying connected to the defensive player's feet when you're passing. The reason I was stressing this is the primary offensive tool for the defensive player is their feet. If they're going to sweep you, if they're going to submit you, or if they're going to stand up, they need to be able to freely move their feet wherever they choose. If you restrict where their feet can go, you restrict their offensive options. So if you can make sure that you keep a connection to their feet and keep their feet in a weak instead of a strong position, you essentially nullify their offensive options, forcing them to play defensively. The reason I had the defensive player's objective set to sweep your opponent instead of don't get passed is so that we can feel in real time how difficult it is to work an offense from a defensive position when they take away our offensive tools. The issue was the offensive player was treating the foot connection that I was stressing as a serious necessity in passing. They were treating it as if it was inconsequential, and that if they could just speed around the legs or just squeeze harder or jump and do some athletic things, that they would pass anyway. The issue was some of the higher level guys that were trying that against guys who haven't been doing jiu-jitsu very long, they were getting a positive result. They were passing. And that can actually be one of the worst things in jiu-jitsu is when we get a positive result doing the wrong thing because we create this feedback loop where we think that's correct and our body wants to do it more. We create this false positive. One of the easier ways for me to show that to people is, okay, this round you're going to partner up with me and you're going to try that same thing. And then they just get swept 10 times. And one of my biggest pet peeves in that specific scenario is they walk away from their solution failing and getting swept a bunch to, oh, well, you're just good. Yeah, but you should want your jiu-jitsu to work on good people. You don't want to just be able to beat the bottom of the barrel guys and give yourself a pat on the back. You should want to be a better grappler. You should want to be able to stand a chance against better grapplers. If your solutions aren't working against guys who are even somewhat proficient, you're not a good grappler. You're actually bottom of the barrel like the other guys. You're just slightly above the bottom of the barrel. It's not where you want to be. Or maybe it is. In my opinion, that's not where you should want to stay. So Monday, everyone was way too tense. They weren't prioritizing the connection to the feet. They were just basically spazzing out the whole class. Now, that's not to say at the end of the class, I didn't have a room full of people coming up to me covered in sweat being like, oh, coach, that was so fun. They did. They had a great time. I bet, right? Sometimes just working hard and getting that out feels like a lot of fun. I was secretly seething. I was trying to like withhold my rage because I'm trying to teach what I think is a very simple, basic, fundamental idea, and no one picked it up. Or maybe like one or two guys did, but pretty much no one picked it up. The entire room was just a bit of a nightmare. Continually trying to explain these guys to take a chill pill and calm down and relax and try and feel these things out. But they were getting way too competitive, and they weren't leaning into the whole spirit of what training ecologically is supposed to be. So I'm not even really going to go into Monday because that's essentially it, right? I had an idea on the way I wanted the class to go, and no one did any of it, and they just tried their own ridiculous solutions and got swept a bunch of times. And if they did pass, it wasn't because of anything they did correctly. It was high likelihood that the person they were passing had inadequate skills. So I came into Wednesday not looking forward to teaching the class. I really considered just moving on to something else entirely and teaching something non-related and just be like, we'll revisit this a different time. But I stuck to my guns and I was like, no, we're gonna do this. We're gonna do this properly. We did our warm-up, we got through, brought everyone in, and I kind of prefaced the lesson with a little monologue where I explained my vast disappointment at the outcomes of Monday's lesson. Wednesday, I only had maybe a handful of people who were at Monday's lesson. Wednesday was pretty much a new group with maybe like 4 or 5 guys from my Monday's lesson peppered in. And girls, don't want to be sexist. So prefacing the lesson with, you guys are a huge letdown. I hate you. I don't want to do this anymore. Not quite that serious, but that was maybe how it felt coming from me, because up until this point, I've been relatively pleasant. But prefacing it with, look, I've really sat and thought about it. And if you were actually trying to do what it was I was trying to teach you to do, and then that wasn't working, I'd be able to sit down and try and articulate better what it is that I was trying to get you to do. But that wasn't the issue. The issue was we were getting way too focused on the outcome and not realizing that developing the skill of body lock passing, realizing that I'm giving you the solution, but conceptually and putting a priority on understanding the solution would have led to the outcome. But people were like, well, that seems like more work than I really want to do. And so I'm just going to try and rush to the outcome. And it led to no skill development and a lot of failures. It led to a lot of sweeps. The guy on bottom got really good at sweeping. And so maybe it wasn't like a total bust, but it isn't what I wanted my guys to come away with. So Wednesday, prefacing the lesson with, look, you guys have got to chill out, right? You got to realize that in this training room, even if you feel like you have little competitive things against certain people, even if you feel like you have a closer skill set, a closer weight, whatever it is that makes certain training partners more competitive, and you want to test yourself competitively, that you can do that in your rolling at the end. And I don't have any issue. What you have to realize is some of these guys are wanting to compete. Some of these guys have got MMA fights coming up or just had them, and they're looking to get back into camp or whatever it is. You want your training partners to succeed when those events come up. And so in the training room, you have to help each other out. Now, I'm not saying give each other passes. I'm not saying make it easy for each other, but you have to stop trying to beat the other person, and you have to try and focus on succeeding with the skills in front of you. At the end of the day, what we go to class for isn't to just go and fight each other. It's to get better at grappling. And so the only way we're going to get better at grappling is when we pay attention to these things and we try and apply them sincerely. And so the difference on Wednesday, prefacing the lesson with how much of a huge disappointment everyone was, by the first game, they were ready to move on to the next concept. What took them 3 hours on Monday, they achieved in one round of the game on Wednesday, just because their attitude was totally different. On Wednesday, they slowed right down. The person on the bottom was still actively trying to sweep the whole time, but the person on top wasn't rushing through the pass. And we talked about this idea of, if you can't do it slow, you can't do it fast, right? I want to see you being as slow and methodical as possible. If you have to use your athleticism, if you have to use explosiveness, if you have to use strength, those things are fine when we're competing. Those things are fine when we're rolling. Like, learning how to use those attributes alongside your grappling is great. But when we're just training, try and figure it out just using the technical aspects like your position, right? And your isolation of limbs. Try and utilize those skills in this environment so that you can really refine what it is you're supposed to be doing. And then when you want to explode and be a spaz, do that and you're rolling, and it might either help and make it better, or it might make it way worse, and you'll realize, oh, I can actually slow down even in my rolling, and it'll probably be a little bit more effective. But I don't care at that point. But when we're training and you're ruining not only your training partner's time by being an idiot, but you're also reducing the atmosphere of the room, and people are falling into that atmosphere, it just becomes a nightmare. So Wednesday was way better because by the first game, like I said, they were already implementing these concepts of staying connected to the foot and the importance of just actually prioritizing keeping that foot in a weak position as they're passing. How everything else kind of became really easy as they were doing that. One of the things that we were noticing within the first 2 games is as soon as they would lose focus on what it is they were supposed to be doing. And so Monday, the focus was, oh, I'm supposed to be passing. And so all the focus is on that, but they're not focused on where their opponent's feet were at all. And so they were getting swept a bunch. On Wednesday, they were focused on the connection to the feet and the connection to the feet only. And what they were realizing as soon as they switched off from that focus of where are the feet, I have a good connection to them, I'm keeping the foot and the leg and the hip in a immobile, weak position. As soon as they took the focus from that and put it on passing again, even momentarily, their opponent's feet would slip out from the connection, become offensive tools again, and they would get swept or reversed, and it would become a real big issue. But at least they were able to recognize, like, oh, as soon as I take my focus off that connection, even momentarily, it can become a tool utilized against me. And they were able to register that within like the first 1 to 3 games. Treating that foot connection as inconsequential in any way, taking it for granted, being like, okay, I have it, I can focus on the passing now. It can immediately slip out and now it's a hook and you can be lifted. Even worse, if we had subs in the game, a lot of people would have really gotten submitted if they weren't keeping an eye on that foot connection. I was watching people who will say are less athletic utilize this passing style on people who are really explosive and athletic and completely shutting down their explosive and athletic capability. And that's the beauty of the body lock. For me, I have a very mobile and dynamic guard. And when people get really good at the body lock, it shuts down a lot of that mobility and a lot of my dynamic options. When I was a purple belt, the body lock pass was my favorite pass to counter. I loved it when people tried to body lock pass me because I just had all of these options to mess them up from that pass. Looking back on it, I realized they weren't prioritizing the foot connection at all. They were prioritizing the hip connection. They were squeezing as hard as they can and just trying to like jump over or explode around my legs like people were doing on Monday. And I would sweep them over my head. I would heel hook them. I would Kimura them. I would guillotine them. It was my if someone tried to body lock past me, I was like, mint, let's go. If they really understand the foot connection, it's a nightmare. It's really, really difficult to deal with. And we got to see that. That also brings me to a lot of the questions I was having on Monday. It kind of frames the issues I was having. I'm really talking about prioritizing the foot connection. Hands are going up. Coach, you got a question? What about the hand grip? It's like, again, like the hand grip. If you like an S grip, do an S grip. If you like a gable grip, do a gable grip. I like, personal preference, I like double palms up. There's reasons for that, right? I think the S grip, it makes my elbows flare away from my body, trying to tuck them in. I'm using a lot of my lat there. It's just like there's a lot of tension in my body. I just don't like it. Same thing with the gable, right? It feels the exact same way. Just, if anything, a little bit less tense. And maybe people like that feeling of tension because it makes them feel like they have a tighter squeeze or a tighter connection. That's an illusion. I like double palms up. I can't put as much tension into my lats. My body's more relaxed, but I can bring my elbows in way tighter to my body than compared to here, right? And I can pull my hands towards my chest through their lower back and connect myself to their hips. To their hips with my chest by pulling them into me rather than trying to squeeze them like this. I get to stay a little bit more relaxed. It also means if I have to disconnect, I haven't got to like unhook my hands and try and pull them out. I'm here, and if I want to slip one out and do something else or grab a foot, it's easy for me to do that compared to like having to, especially if they're like lying on me, it's like it can be a pain in the ass. Even with this, like I'm tangled in. So sometimes like overcommitting to your grip can create problems down the line. And it's really simple. You just prioritize the connection to the foot and you work your way up towards the side of the leg of the foot that you have a connection to. You'll clear the knees, still trying to maintain a connection to the foot until you're cleared of the knees. And then once you're cleared of the knees, you're at the hip. Because especially with the body lock, you're already connected to the hip. The reason I like the body lock and it's so effective against scrambly dynamic guys is you're connected to both ends of the lever. You have that foot connection and you have the hip connection, meaning you're isolating that limb in its entirety. As long as you're maintaining a connection to both ends of that lever, it's isolated. You should be able to get around it relatively low effort, provided you maintain those connections. That's why the body lock is so effective. The main difference, and the thing I really wanted to share with you guys, is the difference on Monday was everyone was spazzing and just trying to use their strength and athleticism and their explosiveness and just trying to squeeze and hold on. And they weren't making any reads on what the bottom player was doing. They weren't reading where the feet were, whether or not they still had connection. They didn't care about the intricacies of what makes grappling work. They were just tunnel vision towards passing without trying to develop the skills that were going to help them do it. The difference on Wednesday was because they were relaxed and paying attention to where the feet were. As they were passing, if they lost that connection to the foot, instead of just trying to run forward and keep passing, they would revert their position backwards a bit and reestablish that foot connection, shutting down the defensive players' offensive capabilities, and then they would carry on trying to pass with a increased constrained focus on the connection to the foot. It was huge. It was like night and day. It was so good. I came away from Wednesday being like, that was probably the best class of jiu-jitsu I've ever taught. I've never seen such a massive development in skill in one specific area than I had on Wednesday. Comparatively, is that it? Is that the right word? Comparatively? Yeah, we'll say comparatively. Comparatively to Monday, which was easily the worst. I've never had 3 hours of people doing one skill and just not getting it. Compared to Wednesday, where it was huge. It was like a total night and day difference. And so I realized, and what I wanted to share in this video is your attitude to training and skill development is going to have way more of an impact to your overall skill development than just the techniques or the concepts or the games that you play, right? If you go into class, even if you're doing like IP, if your attitude is like getting it perfect and getting frustrated at yourself when it isn't perfect, you're not going to take the information in very well. You're making learning very unpleasant. If you're doing ecological and you're doing your games, you're just trying to win the objective at any means necessary, not realizing the game is a catalyst for you to develop the skills that the coach is giving you. You're going to, maybe you win a couple of games throughout the class, but you're not actually developing the skill, which that's the real prize. You want to develop the skill. As you develop more and more skills, you're going to become a better grappler. And so your attitude, your focus, what it is you pay attention to is what will develop. What gets measured gets managed. So if you're measuring your success based on the amount of games you have a definitive win, you're missing the point. You're supposed to be measuring whether or not you're developing the skills and utilizing the ideas that are being presented to you. You can't just look at your coach. If your coach is way better than you, you can't just look at your coach and go, oh, he's just better than me because he's done this longer. No, it's because he has a fundamental understanding of the game that you don't. And if he's presenting ideas to you that don't necessarily make sense straight away, you should be trying to grapple with the idea until it makes some kind of sense to you. Because if he's telling you, hey, once you understand this idea, the game becomes a lot easier, you shouldn't just be going, oh, well, I'll just pass and I can pat myself on the back and go, I passed that guy's guard a bunch of times. The idea wants to make as much sense to you as it does to him so that you don't have to think about it. It becomes subconscious. When we stay calm and relaxed and we aren't fixated on just needing to win to inflate our own egos or our own sense of success, failures genuinely become a rich source of information. Not just like is said in the cliche, like, oh, you're either win or you learn. I haven't said that since I was like a white belt or a blue belt. But it becomes a real thing. It's not just something you say to like placate yourself because you just got your ass beat. It becomes a real thing because you were relaxed and able to realize what went wrong and why it went wrong, instead of just having someone explain it back to you. Oh, okay. And then you go back in and just do the exact same thing without thinking about how you're going to change your approach. When you're chill and you're actually taking in the stimulus and the information that's being given to you, you can adjust your response based on that stimulus. Monday, everyone was too tense to make any reads, way too tense to understand the little intricacies of what was going right and what was going wrong. And so they weren't able to adjust to any of the stimulus or any of the information that was coming at them physically. Wednesday, because they were chill, it was totally different. The other element is when you're tense and you're just moving, you're using a lot of energy that doesn't have a high return. And that isn't energy you get back. You don't just get to take a couple of breaths, chill out for a minute, and then go into your next round, and then you've got all that energy back. A lot of it is lost forever, at least for the point of that training. Funnily enough, solving problems requires some level of energy. Funnily enough, solving problems is difficult when you are out of breath, stressed, and low on energy. Funnily enough, solving problems is easier when we have a surplus of energy to withdraw from. We have control of our breathing, it's nice and regulated, and we're relaxed. You don't want to get into a serious situation where everything's kicking off and you've got a serious problem to solve and you're like, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll freak out and I'll start hyperventilating, and then it'll be easier for me to solve the problem. You wouldn't give that advice to anyone, not anyone you actually wanted to solve the problem anyway. We talked about it with the armbar, and we got to touch on it again briefly this week in that tension restricts movement. If I'm passing your guard, even if I'm doing it with something like a body lock where I have to stay connected to you, I'm going to have to move in order to pass. Tension still restricts movement in that idea, in that concept. And so I want to be as relaxed as possible. Relaxed enough that I can move, connected enough that I don't get reversed or whatever it is. It's finding that balance. It's feeling it out. Excessive tension and squeezing, mainly due to insecurity in the position and not feeling confident with the position, is going to limit your own mobility. And it's going to overall slow your skill development because you're relying on something that isn't helping you. Something else we really got to look at towards the end of the lesson as well, which was cool, well, on Wednesday, not Monday, obviously, was if a concept works one way, you should be able to reverse it as the opposite player. What I mean by that is the offensive player is trying to prioritize the foot connection so that they can pass. The defensive player, what they should be prioritizing is clearing that foot connection. If they're connected to your feet and putting it in a weak position, instead of trying to I'm going to try and sweep, or I'm going to try and prevent the that's all out the window. You need to be getting those feet back into play so that you can be the offensive player. As long as they have a connection to your foot and they're keeping it in a weak position, you don't have any real options. You've got to get that back. And then the game, instead of becoming you're going to pass and you're going to sweep, which is the macro game, let's say, the micro game that's actually being played to determine whether or not someone's going to win the macro game is, can you keep your feet clear or can you keep their feet constrained? That becomes the little micro game. Because if you can get your feet clear, you can win and he can't. If you can keep a connection to the feet and keep their feet in a weak position, you can win and they can't. So even though I give them this level to play on, which we never broke out of on Monday because they just weren't picking it up, and I want them to at least get an idea of these things conceptually from their own experience rather than just me explaining it. Because they never picked it up, we never got to focus on the deeper layer that's actually resting underneath the surface level stuff. Whereas on Wednesday, we'd covered the surface level stuff within 2 games. And we'd kind of moved past this way of thinking, and we were really putting a lot of focus down here, and the game was becoming really, really quite fun to watch. Young Anthony, kind enough to leave a comment on my last video. Anthony asks about 50 questions a class. Sometimes great questions, sometimes stupid. I'll make fun of them when they're stupid, and I'll really lean into the good questions. I don't want to feel like all questions are valid. Sometimes they're dumb. And sometimes it's not that they're dumb. Sometimes it's like, well, you can ask me that question and you're relying way too much on me to just give you the information and help you out. Sometimes those questions you can ask yourself and implement those questions in your next game, and you'd probably be able to come to the conclusion yourself, and you'll be able to share something with me. Maybe I already know it, but you'll be able to go, hey coach, I was thinking, well, why do I have to do this way? And so I played with doing something that way and then doing something this way, and I came to this conclusion based on both sets of data, let's say. And I'll be like, yeah, dude, that's a great observation. And he has done that. So I'm not going to lean into bullying Anthony on my YouTube channel. But he asked me something, and I wasn't sure if it was a stupid question. He said, do I have to pass on the side of the foot I have a connection to? Now, if that's what he meant, that is a stupid question. It's like, yeah, of course. Like, if you have a connection to a foot and you start passing to the side where you don't have a connection to the foot, you're going to get swept or reversed. So instead of just immediately ridiculing him, I was like, what do you mean? Explain what you mean. Because I think I misunderstand. And he said, well, let's say you have a connection to the left foot and you're passing on the left side. And then the right foot is able to come back in, and it becomes a tool where they could potentially sweep or submit you. Do I have to keep passing to the left side? And I'm like, okay, there's a couple of things to talk about in that. That's actually a really, really good question. If they were able to do that, it's a high likelihood that you've either lost the connection to the foot on the side you're passing to, or you no longer have it in a weak position. So now their hip has dexterity and mobility so that they can bring that opposite leg back inside. So that means you can't pass to the left because you don't have that foot anymore. But as that right foot sneaks in and it connects to you, it can sweep you. You can actually use that new connection to pass on the opposite side. So yes, you have to pass on the side of the foot that you're connected to, but you don't have to only pass that way. If you can find a way to connect to the opposite foot as you're passing, or they give you an opportunity to connect to the opposite foot as you're passing, not only could you pass to the opposite side, you probably should. Reason I was so annoyed on Monday is I think the body lock pass is actually really simple to understand and practice with the right attitude. The issue was we had a terrible attitude. But that became a whole different lesson in and of itself. I normally say that a lot faster, but it just sounds like I'm mumbling. I think that became a whole different lesson based on how amazing Wednesday went compared to how terribly Monday went. The lesson became, through body lock passing, guys, you got to chill. And if I give you a focus point that's going to lead to an outcome, the outcome shouldn't become your focus point. The focus point is your focus point. The focus point leads to the outcome. The outcome sounds like something we want. Maybe the outcome is a pass. Maybe the outcome is a submission, or it's a particular kind of sweep, whatever it is. The outcome will happen through the focus point. I'm going to move over here because I'm behind the mic. Through the focus point. Get this out of your head and only prioritize the skill. Only prioritize the concept that's going to get you the outcome. Because if you develop this, this will become easy. If you only focus on this and neglect the focus point, neglect the skill, even if you succeed, you're not going to know why you succeeded, whether or not it was something you did right, or whether or not it was something they did wrong. And you're still not getting the thing that I wanted you to get. So even if you come away from the end of the lesson being, that was really fun, I passed a couple of times, it was a good lesson, everyone who actually focused on the focus point is going to wreck you going forward. And you're not going to understand why, because you were so fixated on the outcome that you neglected the solution that was going to lead you to it in maybe a more efficient and easier way. A lot of what makes jiu-jitsu difficult for a lot of people is their own approach. It's them. They're the biggest obstacle. And so a lot of what makes learning jiu-jitsu easier is just learning how to get out of your own way. Most of what becoming a better grappler is just making less mistakes. So if we can make less mistakes in terms of focusing on the outcome and actually put more of a focus on what's going to deliver the outcome, the solution, we'll make less mistakes and we'll become a better grappler.